to our second episode of Mostly Veg. Today we'll be making a Brussels sprout and cheese pizza. We've got all our ingredients here, so let's go over what we'll be needing to create this. Of course, main ingredient, Brussels sprouts. If you don't love Brussels sprouts, this pizza may turn you into a believer. It's happened with several friends. I think you're really gonna love it, so give it a try if you don't love Brussels sprouts. We've got Romano cheese. We will be grating this here in a bit. You could also use Parmesan. Any type of kind of hard, salty cheese is gonna work really well for this. We've got a red onion and we've got some garlic. Garlic will probably be in every single recipe that we do because I love garlic so much. And it's, I like to think it's the reason I don't get sick very often. Very good for the immune system. We'll also be making our own dough. So we've got some of those ingredients here too. We've got all-purpose flour. We've got sugar, salt, and active dry yeast is what will be used to create that. So we also have a number of different tools that we'll be using. A lot of them are gonna be nice to have things that I've collected over time, but that I love and I think are great investments. The first is a pizza peel. If you're going to be making lots of pizzas, this is really nice to not have to be shoving your hands in and out of the oven. So a really great investment to have. You can find them pretty cheap too, so not a big investment, but a pizza peel is really nice, nice to have. The other thing we'll be using today is a pizza stone. These come in all different shapes and sizes. I kind of like the square ones, there's round ones too. But this is a great way to make sure that your crust is nice and crispy. This will be preheated in the oven while the oven heats, and so it'll be really hot already once that dough hits it and we stick it in the oven. So another really nice investment to have if you're gonna be making lots of pizzas, and I think after you taste this pizza, you will be. We'll also be using a food processor to cut the vegetables and to grate the cheese. These are things you can do by hand, just with a knife or a cheese grater, but I have the food processor and it makes it a lot easier, so that's what I'm gonna do. And we'll also be using a standing mixer to make the dough. So let's get started on the dough first. It is gonna take a little bit of time to rise, so that's definitely the first thing we wanna get done, so that can be rising while we're chopping up the vegetables and preparing everything else. Okay, for the dough, we need to get the yeast mixture started. So we've got a cup of warm water, about 105 to 115 degrees is what we want that water at. We're gonna put in a teaspoon of sugar, mix that up, and then we're gonna put in a tablespoon of that active dry yeast. If you have those packets that we showed in the beginning, those packets, about a packet and a half equals a tablespoon. So give that a little mix here, and then we'll set that aside for about 5 or so minutes. We really want to start to see that get all bubbly and know that the yeast is working. In our mixer, we already have 3 cups of the all-purpose flour in. We'll add a teaspoon of salt, and we'll give that a little initial stir here. Just want to make sure the salt and the flour are mixed together, and we'll wait for the yeast to start to get activated, another few minutes. All right, our yeast is nice and bubbly. You can see that nice big foam on the top. That's how you know it's ready to go. So we're just gonna pour it in. We are in Colorado, so we're at a higher altitude, so we might need to add a little bit more water. We'll see kind of how the mixture looks. 1 cup of water is typically good if you're not at a high altitude, but if you are at higher, you need a little bit more water. Can't do that with. All right. So our dough is looking a little dry. I am going to add a little bit more water and turn it up and just let it knead in here for a few minutes so that we don't have to hand knead it because that's never fun. So want to let the mixer do all the kneading. So I'm going to add a little bit more water, just keep an eye on it and see when it gets to a good consistency. Whole table shaking. All right, let's check this, see how it feels. You want it to be not too sticky. It shouldn't really stick to your hands, but shouldn't feel dry. You shouldn't visibly see any flour on it either, so it should be pretty well mixed. I think it needs to be a little bit more wet, so I'm gonna add just a tiny bit more water. All right. The dough is looking good. Now we're gonna take it out and put it into a bowl to let it rise. Put a little bit of oil in that bowl so it doesn't stick. Kind of shape it into a ball. And then we will cover this up with some plastic wrap and let it sit for about an hour. We want the dough to double in size. So we're gonna cover this, put that saran wrap on it and set it aside in a warm spot, and we'll start preparing the vegetables. All right, we'll start first with grating the cheese. We've got the food processor with the grater wheel thingy. I don't know what it's called. The one with all the little holes. So we'll put that on, and then we'll cut the cheese into chunks that can go into the top here. Probably won't need a whole triangle of cheese for it, but we'll just grate it all anyway. And yeah, so turn your food processor on. You can push it down with the little pusher, so you don't have to get your hands in there. All right. Now that our cheese is grated, we will pour it into a bowl and set it aside. Save these ends to snack on. Now we're gonna use the same food processor for the vegetables, but we're gonna switch whatever this thing is called, plate, to the one that juliennes them. You could use a mandolin for this too, but getting the really nice thin layers of the Brussels sprouts and the onions is what helps to make this so great, and that you're not really tasting a lot of the bitterness of the Brussels sprouts once it cooks, and it'll cook quickly because we're not going to pre-cook these. They'll just cook right on the pizza, so you want them as thin as possible. So first, before we add those in, we need to cut the ends off the Brussels sprouts and peel off the outer layers. Sometimes you can see some dirt on these, so you just need to peel off those outer layers. So we cut off the ends and peel off the layers that don't look so great, and then we'll start to throw them in. So let me get a couple of them going. Yeah, you can see some of these have a little bit of, I don't know, dirt on them, but you just pull them off and you got a perfectly good Brussels sprout underneath. So we just throw these in the same way that we were doing it with the cheese. You can use the little guy now. And you see it slices it really nice and thin. So we'll do that with all of the Brussels sprouts here. All right, we've got our last few Brussels sprouts to put in here. See, so much easier than cutting it by hand. So we can leave those in there. We're gonna do the same thing with the onion. You wanna peel off the outer layers first. But just do maybe not even half in this onion. It's a big onion. So same thing, put it in just like with the Brussels sprout. I'm gonna do a little bit more. You don't want the onion to overpower, but I want a good amount in there, so we'll do this. All right. So now we're gonna take this out. Whew, those onions are strong. Even when you don't cut it yourself. And then we want to add some oil to this and season with salt and pepper. And then, it's so beautiful. I'm crying. So now our veggies are mostly chopped. And we want to make a sauce for the pizza. So we're not going to be using a red sauce. It's just going to be an olive oil and garlic sauce. So we just need to chop up some garlic and put it in some oil and let it sit and kind of marinate in that for a little bit. So grab that garlic, clove. So for garlic, the best way, move some of the stuff out of the way. The best way to mince garlic, if you're doing it by hand and not using a garlic press or something, is to put your knife flat on it and just smack the hell out of it. You might need to do it a few times if it's a big one, like that one was. And then from there, you can just start to chop it. So we are gonna just take this garlic and put it in a little bowl here and add some olive oil to it. And this will be the sauce for our pizza. We're not going to be doing anything else. So we just want that to sit a little bit and let that olive oil get really garlicky. And so maybe letting it sit for 10 minutes or so will help to infuse that olive oil and that garlic together. All right, our dough is finally ready. It's been resting for about an hour in a warm place. I put it on top of the fridge, but you might want to put it on your oven, a little residual heat from that, or just wrap it in some blankets. That can really help it to rise faster. I mentioned the oven, we did preheat the oven to 475. If you are at a lower altitude, I would say go to 500 degrees. And make sure that if you're using a pizza stone, that you put that pizza stone in the cold oven and let it preheat together. If not, the pizza stone might crack and break. And that has happened to me, and it's not fun and very scary. But if you let them warm up together, it should be fine. So now, yeah, you can see how much bigger our dough got. Now, we're just gonna use half of this for one pizza. It does make quite a bit, and we're gonna make the pizza right on the pizza peel. We need lots of flour to make sure that when we go to put it into the oven, it actually slides off and doesn't get stuck anywhere. So we'll make sure we're really floured everywhere on this. And then we'll take half of this dough. I'm just gonna cut it right in half here. If you are making a second pizza in one day, great, you can just use that dough. If not, you can save it, put it in the refrigerator in a plastic bag or even in the freezer, and just make sure that before you use it, you let it warm up to room temperature on the counter, because you don't want to work with cold dough. It won't stretch very easily. So we are going to stretch out our dough. I am still working on like tossing it up. No, I'm not even working on it. I'm not good at it. I'm not even gonna try it. But the way I stretch dough is, knead it a little bit with my hands around, and then use my knuckles to kind of pull. Might need a little bigger before we do that. But if you use your knuckles rather than your fingertips, you're less likely to poke a hole through it. You could use a rolling pin if you want it a more consistent shape and thinness. I like a nice thick crust, so I don't want to roll it out. I like to keep the edges a little bit thicker. So I like to just use my hands, gently pull. You want to try not to put any holes in it. If you do, that's fine. You can just smush it back together, but you can see, maybe you can see some of the spots that there's some thinner areas. So just try to avoid those spots and just gently stretch it until you get it to the size that you want. So this is probably about a good size. Like I said, I like to keep the crust so that there is a good crust on it. It's one of my favorite parts. I eat my fiance's crust that he doesn't eat left over. It's my favorite part. So not everyone's the same. If you don't like crust, you can definitely spread all the toppings out to the edge, and then you will have less crust and more of the pizza toppings. So I think this is pretty good. So now we're gonna start with the garlic infused olive oil. So you just want like a thin layer of this. This will act as our sauce, but you don't want it too thick because that's a lot of olive oil and it'll be a little too juicy. So just keep it pretty thin. Just make sure to cover every area that you're going to put the toppings on. And make sure you get some of that good garlic in there. Some good chunks of it. Now we're gonna put on the Brussels sprout and onion mixture. So you can be pretty generous with this, however much you want. Now we didn't cook this, as I mentioned. This is gonna cook in the oven. And that's why we wanted to make sure that the Brussels sprouts were so thin, so that they did, even though it's only gonna be in there for a short time, so that they'll be able to cook, because they're really thin. So that looks like a good amount. And then we'll put on our Romano cheese. And again, just, a good layer. I think that looks good. So I think that this is ready to go in the oven. So here is our beautiful Brussels sprout and cheese pizza. This was in the oven for about 10 minutes at
500.
If you are at a lower altitude and baking it at
475.
around 7 or 8 minutes to make sure it doesn't burn. A handy tip for knowing when a pizza is done is to actually stand it up on its edge. And if it can stand up like that, that means that the dough is cooked and set and you've got a great crust and it's ready to be eaten. So this pizza is definitely something that we make all the time. It's a great way to incorporate some more vegetables into your life, whether you are a vegetarian, a vegan, or just trying to be a little bit more. If you've joined our Meatless 20 challenge, this is a great meal to cook on any weekday so that you can get those 20 days each month going meat-free. If you are vegan, the only thing on this pizza that isn't vegan is the cheese. So use a dairy-free cheese replacement, or just scrap the cheese altogether and you still have a really delicious meal. So that is it, our Brussels sprouts and cheese pizza. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and you can find us on Instagram at bemostlyveg or on our website at bemostlyveg.com. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.